All right, people, this is it. End of the road. No, me and Luke are not doing a Lost recap. Like I said last week, we're saving the rest of the recap for season 1 for January next week. Instead, I'm joined by my movie guy, one of my OGs, Nathaniel A. Hart, to discuss. That's right, we're doing another double feature, a classic, a staple of the Talkin' TV podcast of old. We haven't done this one in a while. I really haven't been reviewing that much movies for the fall, just because, given how the movie season really was going in 2024, it just really didn't seem like it was that worth it. Maybe we'll get back to it in 2025. Who knows? But for now, Nathaniel, we're back, and we're covering two movies that could not be more different, but at the same time, also, I think one of these is already on my top 10 list of the year. I'll be interested to see if one or both of these make your top 10 of the year. We'll have to see once those come out. But we are. Which two movies are we doing for our end of the year? Our season 6 finale, which, holy crap, I can't believe that we're just finishing up 6 seasons. That means we're at the halfway point of my original podcast proclamation when we first started this.
Damn, dude. Much props to you on that, of course. I mean, that's pretty incredible. Milestone. We're doing what I like to call Nosferatu double feature. We're going to be talking about Complete Unknown and Robert Eggers' Nosferatu.
Listen, I'll take that over that fucking Glicken bullshit. All of that
it rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah, I like the Bob Sferatu better. It's got a little bit more of like it's got a little bit more of a self-awareness to it. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talkin' TV podcast. Stay tuned. Let's see if my voice can last throughout the entirety of this. All right, Nathaniel, we're here. Season 6 finale, man. Oh, man. Hard to believe what a different place in the world we were in back in 2019 and how much has changed since then. How much since, obviously, the two of us met. So this is kind of a little bit of a throwback, I would say, in the sense of where I feel like we both kind of became aware of these two filmmakers while we were in college. James Mangold has been directing movies since the 90s. Robert Eggers is part of the new generation of film brats that I consider to be a part of, the new, what's it called? The millennial filmmakers, along the lines of like, Jordan Peele, Ryan Coogler, Damien Chazelle, Greta Gerwig, and the likes and such. And it's kind of funny how you have two movies that couldn't be more polar opposite in terms of the tone and the genre that they're going for. One's like one's a music biopic, one's a horror remake of one of the classic films of film literature or film of cinema. It's not literature. I don't know why I said that, but kind of, sort of. So you said you wanted to start off with Complete Unknown with Bob Dylan. Yes. So we both literally just saw this today. You saw both these movies today. I saw Nosferatu a couple days ago on Christmas Day. So talk about it. Listen, man, you're the music guy, so you take this one.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And this is why I wanted to come on here, because I'm a massive Dylan head. I've listened to all 40 studio albums from Bob Dylan. He's like top 2 artist of all time for me, greatest songwriter ever lived, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all know the accolades that have been thrown at Dylan, and deservedly so. He transformed what, basically could be accomplished in pop music, but just in writing in general, bringing that depth and poetry that basically hadn't existed before him for the most part. So going into this movie, I was going to be a little bit more hesitant, seeing Timothee Chalamet, who I think is great and so much, and seems like a lovely guy in the industry as well. And when I saw the trailers, I was like, he's getting some of the mannerisms down, but I just couldn't help myself. I'm like, I'm just seeing Timmy here, you know what I mean? I'm like, but I'll give the movie a go. And then I started hearing the buzz once the early reactions came out. It was glowing all across the board. And I would say, like, maybe near the beginning, there are like a couple moments where you can kind of tell, but it's like almost instantly he really draws you in with his spot on mannerisms of Dylan, just the way, like, he, his posture, the way he moves his eyes, the way he moves his head. Like, when he's performing some of the songs, I think especially by the time we got to, like, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, or maybe even Blowing in the Wind, I don't know. But, like, there were a few moments in the movie where he was performing on stage, and I had to tell myself that was not Bob Dylan. It is so spectacular, and it's a very subtle performance too. Like it is very showy because he's playing one of the most largest icons in the history of just pop culture in general, and just like the little laugh he does, like even moments like that, because I'm like, this is just like so spot on who Bob Dylan is. It felt like Bob Dylan entered the vessel of another human being, because obviously he's still with us, but my goodness, it might have felt like he possessed him in that moment. I think Chalamet is absolutely terrific in this. This is one of the best performances of the year. I wouldn't be upset if he won the Oscar. We'll see how things play out. I still think Adrian Brody is going to be tough to beat for The Brutalist, but this is right near the top of the heap, and I think he's easily the best part of this entire film. He's why you watch it.
Yeah, so this is I had a little bit of baggage coming to this. I'll be completely honest. This is coming off of a long line of biopics that I will admit kind of went for a little bit more of a jukebox feel rather than like nailing the real aspects of the real life. Ironically, this kind of goes back to when we first met, when Bohemian Rhapsody first came out.
Yeah, way better than that movie.
Way better, yeah. And it kind of started this line of, oh, people don't actually care about whether these movies capture these musicians or their lives accurately. They kind of just want to go and like jam out to the music that they love when they were kids, and that seemed to be kind of the consensus off of Bohemian Rhapsody, and that kind of continued with Rocket Man and Elvis, which we also saw together as well. So I was skeptical going into this, and obviously not only just with music biopics, but with biopics in general, about how they kind of just want to make people feel good, and they don't necessarily want to tell like the true story of these guys, which are often not that pretty, And obviously, bringing in the Timothee Chalamet of it all, he's somebody who obviously has been working his way up to become like the new like it guy megastar. Like I would honestly kind of make the argument that he's sort of becoming the new DiCaprio, honestly, which is never something I agree that I thought I would say about anyone. But he really does seem to be going for that role where, again, he's not going for the superhero parts. He does have the big franchise, but he really is trying to show off his ability as an actor and the range and level that he is capable of. Obviously, the irony being that this movie came out off of the impact of Dune 2, which was kind of the go-to blockbuster of the year. And that movie wasn't even originally supposed to come out this year. That was supposed to be a 2023 release. And, what's it called? So obviously going into this, I was like, okay, is this going to be another case where he's just doing an impression and they're going to have to dub Dylan over him, And now, I will say, and I've talked about this before when I've talked to Timothy, my acting teacher at the neighborhood playhouse, Sandy Faison, was Timothy's acting teacher when he was at LaGuardia High School. Yeah, and her husband, Todd Sussman, is actually his current acting coach as well, who was also one of my teachers at the school. And one of the interesting, and the thing, based on the way that they've talked about him and like kind of how hard of a worker he is, the thing that I kind of give him props for as I've like kind of developed this relationship with him over the years through watching him in his many different roles is like he's one of the few people who he puts in the work. He puts in the work and he does what's necessary in terms of actually, nailing his performances. And so going into this, like almost immediately when you start watching this, you can tell that this isn't going to be a standard by the numbers biopic, not only just because of the filmmaking, but just because, like you said, the mannerisms that he captures and the fact that, most of the time these biopics all start the same way. Oh, they're kind of downtrodden. They're down in their luck. They're working a regular menial job. They're just waiting for something. And then all of a sudden, inexplicably, they get discovered, And I like how this one kind of, to me, the best biopics are the ones that capture the essence of the person and use that to drive the story. And I like how, at least for the first hour, this movie really did, I feel like, capture his essence by showing it as kind of like being discombobulated. It's a road movie. He's a drifter, which is kind of the whole essence of his character, I feel like. And I like how, again, he's hitchhiking to New York in order to try and find his idol, Woody Guthrie, who is on his deathbed, with Huntington's disease. Played quite brilliantly in a very, very small but pivotal part by Scoot McNairy. That's obviously where he meets Pete Seeger, played by Ed Norton, and then kind of it goes on from there. The other important note to add to this as well, besides the Chalamet piece, which I'm going to get to more of in a little bit, is the James Mangold piece, where this is not the first music biopic that Mangold has done, ironically, where Mangold famously obviously did Walk the Line with Joaquin Phoenix's Johnny Cash back in 2005, which got Joaquin an Oscar nomination. He lost to Philip Seymour Hoffman that year, but the big thing about that is that, so this is his next music biopic. Johnny Cash is in the movie, portrayed by Boyd Holbrook, which is a kind of nice.
Who looks more like Johnny Cash than Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen Walk the Line. I will say that, but from what I understand, this movie is a lot less of like the traditional biopic than that movie, And it's kind of funny how that was kind of in a line of like the first couple of like music biopics following after Ray, and then Walk Hard came out a few years later, kind of blew that sort of biopic off the radar with how well it parodied that sort of style of storytelling before it kind of came back a few years later. I would say that Straight Outta Compton kind of resurrected it before Bohemian Rhapsody kind of, I can't think of the word right now. But anyways, yeah, so I guess kind of my surprise as far as how I enjoyed it. I'll say this, I like the first hour more than the second hour. The second hour kind of slid a little bit more so back into a little bit of traditionalist biopic fare. But I really liked it. My overall general consensus was that the movie was pretty good. Wasn't great, not in my top 10, but it's pretty solid. But it really, really came down to that lead performance. Like, he carried, this is a 2.5 hour long movie. And I was just thinking, I'm like, man, if he doesn't nail this movie's going to fall apart really, really fast. But the thing that I heard is he won over the Dylan Heads. And if I had to guess, if the Dylan Heads are anything like him, they're pretty prickly and pretty very much like, obviously, like, yeah, you better fucking nail this,
I agree.
And nail it he did, to say the least. Like you were saying, just out of the mannerisms, his very specific cadence of speaking, the not quite hippie-ish, where he constantly sounds stoned all the time, but with this very specific manner of speaking. Like, he's one of those guys where he sounds very aloof and all over the place, but he knows exactly what he's talking about.
Exactly. Like, he's just such a wordsmith, even in real life, in his interactions with people. And I do want to mention Walk the Line, because I liked Walk the Line, but it did feel like it was, very by the numbers, that they made a bunch of stuff up. The only thing that I think is apparently, like, there's a couple things I think are apparently wrong in this movie. Well, one, you could contest the history, there was a revisionist narrative. Mike Bloomfield didn't come in to the sessions for Bringing It All Back Home. It was only when they did Highway 61 Revisited. And so I thought they brought him a little bit, into the mix too early, but like, that's not that big of a deal. And then there's, argument whether over Pete Seeger went cut the cord at the Newport Folk Festival in 65, because he said later on he just couldn't hear anything, and that's why he turned it down. Not like, we need to put an end to this. And so I wasn't sure how to feel about that. But other than that, like, the history to this movie is just like spot on. And the way they contextualize the stuff, especially the stuff with Woody Guthrie, like, as you said, Scoot McNairy isn't the movie for long, but like, the impact of the scenes that he has with Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan really, I think, like, sold this movie by the end.
It's interesting as well, because you're right, and that's kind of part of my problem with the second half. Is by the second half, you have those figures that come in, the PJ Byrne character, the the Norbert Leo Butz character. Again, you know all the names of these guys. I do not, because I'm not a music guy.
Not by the actors though.
Well, yeah, but and they're all like, oh, you gotta keep this to be about folk. This can't be about rock and roll. And I guess just kind of, I wish that the second half of the movie had done as good of a job of the first as part of making us understand kind of Dylan's need to rebel, and the need to, be like, okay, like, this isn't really me anymore. I'm more so about, like, experimenting around and doing this. And I just feel like I'm not saying it wasn't there, but I just feel like it wasn't as tight and as well placed out as it was in the first half, and that may just be because it was kind of before he was famous, versus the first half. Like I said, it had this a lot more naturalistic feel, even though it still had the sense of, like, kind of, he kind of gets discovered out of nowhere. That felt more naturalistic because it's set in New York City. That sort of shit happened all the time in New York City, especially at that time period, So the whole kind of like him stumbling into greatness and kind of just wandering around and all that, like I said, that makes sense for his character and all that. Just in the second half, when you start to have the whole, rebelling, he never has the whole "they don't understand me" moment, which I was very, very happy about. But
yeah, well, there is one moment, but I think it's like super, super pivotal, and I think it's like some of his best acting in the entire movie. You might know what scene I'm talking about. I don't know if we want to like spoil anything here. But there is one moment in the middle of the movie where he kind of has like a reckoning with everything that's going on in his life. And I think, I don't need to know like that struggle he was going through. I will say structurally a bit, it did feel like, this could have been like, a more clear, cohesive narrative. But like, being a huge Dylan head, one thing that's well known about him is he's a complete enigma, which is why I think the title of this movie is very apt. And like, the movie begs the question. It's like, not only do the people around him, do they really know who he is, but also does he even know himself at certain points? Right. And so I think just from that perspective, I know people complain, I wish I got to know more about him. That's not the point of the movie. Yeah. It's really just, as you said, like, this movie perfectly captures the essence of who Bob Dylan is as a person. And I also love how low key it is. Like that's
Yeah.
another reason. Like Elvis was just like so ratchet and
way
like,
too in your face, over the top with
exactly.
the editing.
He's what? Like there was no stupid moments like that. There might have been like a couple like goofier moments, but it's like still it felt very grounded and realistic in a way that most of these biopics don't even come close to feeling. Like when he's when he's at Pete Seeger's house and he stays the night and then in the morning he's like just playing Girl from the North Country. It's not like, whoa, what is the song? But like Pete, he notices him and he walks up to him and he knows he's witnessing greatness, and they don't have to say it. It's just this guy who's just like, playing around on his guitar, seeing if something works, but you can feel in that moment that it's special without like spelling it out to you. And I really, really think that's where this movie excelled more than any other musical biopic I've ever seen.
I agree. Yeah, the subtle nods and the whole kind of, like I said, the kind of loose, carefree, very low key. Like it did feel like I was following a real person, not this larger, over the top, larger than life person. It's kind of funny because contrasting this with another movie that's in theaters right now, Better Man, the Robbie, what's his name? Robbie
Williams.
Robbie Williams. Yeah, Robbie Williams. Where for whatever reason he's like, oh yeah, we're gonna make this big, grandiose, over the top. We're literally to the point where we're literally just pulling the exact same CGI scene from Bohemian Rhapsody to put in the trailer of the massive concert scene at Wembley, and I'm just gonna turn myself into a chimpanzee, like for no reason other than that, So I think it's kind of funny how we have that contrast in theaters of this, where again it feels like this is the first time where Hollywood is actually listening to our criticisms of the last couple of years, where it's like, yeah, we're tired of these over the top, ridiculous, nonsensical takes on these people. Like these people are interesting people. We want to know more about them. I'm just so sick of the jukebox over-the-top concert feel, and I really, really do appreciate how this movie did feel very low-key, very naturalistic, very, like, just the scene where he, like, hooks up with the girls. Like, he's going to because, it's Bob Dylan. But even those scenes, like, they were able to kind of make those, they were even kind of able to make those work and not feel forced.
Exactly, man. And also, I have to shout out Monica Barbaro.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! First off, she's just so sexy. I mean, let's just be honest here. But like, even when she started singing as Joan Baez, I was like, oh, she's kind of nailing this too.
Yeah,
like this is really, really good. And I love, the relationship between her and Bob Dylan. I mean, especially with history and them, like their relationship is pretty well documented, and that it was a bit heated and tumultuous at the time, even though they're like friends now, I think. But with Elle Fanning's character, and I know some people are like, well, it didn't tie into the narrative as much, or it felt a little unnecessary. I kind of agree and disagree. I like, kind of that dynamic and how the movie basically, like, they call him out on being an asshole, and he's just like, yes.
He's like, yeah, whatever. like,
it's so funny because it's just like every response, like he's just so well written in this film. Like you said, he doesn't feel like a caricature. It really does feel like Bob Dylan.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the Elle Fanning character I thought was interesting. She felt like a little bit of an expository device at first, but I did kind of like how it's like, how he was kind of like bouncing back and forth between the two of them. I thought that was kind of interesting. And I don't know about you, but like obviously, again, you've got a much closer connection with Dylan. Dylan, I'll admit, is not somebody who I've listened to as much over the years as much as, say, some other big-time musicians that have come up. But for me, I don't know. This might have just been a thing of like harkening back to Watchmen, but when he started playing "Times They Are Changing," that hit right here. I was like, yeah, like I was going nuts for that. And then obviously when he starts playing, what's it called? Is the song called "The Complete Unknown"? I want to make sure I get that right.
Like a rolling stone.
Okay, so that one.
And I will say, I wish they played that whole song, but that would have maybe been too much to ask for. Then they cut away from it. I was like, oh.
Yeah, because they always do that. They always fucking do that in these movies. But yeah.
Yeah, again, to your point, though, like, I love how it's just like a lot of these numbers, it's like they're just in the studio and they're getting ready to do this take. And that's when you hear the music. It's not like Bohemian Rhapsody. It's like, oh, we're going to do this song. This one, it feels very true to like the actual story of them recording it in the studio. Because Al Cooper, who, by the way, when he showed up, I thought it was Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead. I was like, huh? And then
the keyboard player, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's so funny. That's so funny
happened.
that you That's so funny that you say that, because literally as soon as he came in, I was like, oh shit, frog looking dude. What's his name? Joe Keery's duplicate from Ozark, and I couldn't remember his name at first. The actor's name is Charlie Tahan, but literally because he looks like a frog on Ozark.
Oh, so it's the same actor then.
That's the same actor, yeah, from Ozark.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
Not a member of Radiohead.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah, man, I just loved all those little touches like that because it just felt, yet again, naturally integrated in the script, but also true to what happened in real life.
Yeah, and you can tell how far Mangold's come as a filmmaker because, I mean, again, I've only caught, like, the back half of his career. Pretty much everything before he did his remake of 310 to Yuma, I've been a little bit, I've watched as much. I think the only one that I've seen pre-310 to Yuma is Copland, but
Great.
You can tell that, like, all of his films up until that point were very, like, he was making them, like, playing by, like, the rules of the genre. And everything after 310 to Yuma, he was, getting a little bit bigger, a little bit more confident, playing within the studio system, but still, like, being allowed to go outside of his, outside of kind of, the purview as far as what they would allow. I really, really liked Logan. That's still probably my number one of his.
That's his best film.
Just as far as how he was able to so seamlessly blend the superhero and Western genres. Ford vs. Ferrari, I was a little bit whatever on. Dial of Destiny, we don't need to talk about that.
I think that movie's great. I'm in the minority there.
You are definitely in the minority on that, but I don't blame that one on him. I blame that one on Lucasfilm for even commissioning the movie in the first place. But, and obviously the fact of it's like you have 82-year-old Harrison Ford. Like, come on. But, yeah, this I will definitely say is probably my favorite of his movies since Logan. Where this would rank in his movies overall, I'm still trying to figure out, but I was very, very impressed. And I saw that he wrote this with Jay Cox, who's a frequent collaborator with Martin Scorsese on his screenplay. I'm like, all right, so this was always going to be solid at the very least, Like, I guess, again, coming out of this, like, really, really enjoying this as much as I do. Really appreciated Chalamet's performance. He's the one to take away from this, really. And like I said, if he does win, I would not be disappointed. Obviously, Brody is the one to beat right now. But I did want to point this out because you and I know, discussed this a couple weeks ago on the phone. If he wins over Brody, he will not break the record. He just turned 29.
He will.
He will not.
He will not. In the books, he will.
He will not because he'll be 29 by the time he wins.
Closer to 30.
So
technically, just by standards in general, he'll technically win.
So if we're going by the rounding short, but they will both have been 29.
But they will both be 29.
But again, the irony being that the two of them are competing against each other, and the fact that Brody is set to win his second Oscar, it's just one of those things where, again, my conspiracy theory brain gets in. Look, they have to plan this shit out because how the fuck does this shit keep happening over and over and over again, The
coincidences, man. It happens.
There's no such thing as coincidences, but everything is rigged. But yeah. So before we move on to the second movie of the batch, give us your final thoughts and your star rating for Complete Unknown.
Man, this is one of the best musical biopics I've seen in years, maybe since Love and Mercy. Honestly, like I really, really dug this movie from top to bottom. Yet again, the Chalamet performance is just so immaculate. Would you agree it's the best performance of his entire career?
It's up there. So. I'm still trying to figure out if it's this Dune or Beautiful Boy, but
it's way better than this in Dune.
It's definitely up there because I guess for me the whole thing is where I have a hard time between this versus Dune is that I do have a hard time. It's one of those things where whenever you get a biopic, as far as like, okay, it's so good, but like what point of it is is impression, And that always is kind of a hard point for me, because to the point where you nail the performance, the real life person so much that you were saying, I can't really divorce the two, So that's kind of where the division comes for me. But it is certainly one of the best performances of the year, for sure.
Oh, no doubt about it, man. And I would say, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite movies of the year, like Dune Part 2 is, but I would say that I'd say he's infinitely better in here. And that's saying a lot because he's pretty damn great in that movie. And
I was thinking a lot about it. I was like, oh man, I was kind of like, I still love Dune, but I'm like, nah, I got to put him in for this. I have to.
This is it, man. And I honestly, I'd give it 4 out of 5, a very, solid 4 out of 5 stars. I think it loses a little, a bit of momentum by the end. You definitely feel the runtime at least a little bit. They probably could have cut it down. But there is one scene in the movie that apparently James Mangold got one note from Bob Dylan. He's like, yeah, you need to put in a scene that never happened.
Really?
I know what scene it is. Yeah.
Really?
And he says, yeah, and he's like, what do you want it to be? Or like, it's like, are you sure? And he's like, and the most Dylan
response. Classic Dylan response. Oh man.
Yeah, man.
You gotta tell me what scene that is.
So the scene I think it is, because I was like, wait, this seems like too random. The scene where they're where Pete Seeger's doing the TV show?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's that scene because I was
Okay.
like, I don't think I've ever heard about this, so I'm like, that must have
Where
been
Dylan
it.
comes in a TV show and starts playing with
Yeah.
you. Yeah, that scene did seem a little
Yeah.
kind of out of nowhere and did kind of seem to break off the momentum. Yeah. Real quick
Still
before,
enjoyed it, you
yeah, the
know?
only other thing that I forgot to ask, what did you think of Ed Norton as Pete Seeger? Like, because I don't know, like,
That's
I'm
a
like,
good question.
with somebody who doesn't have any sort of relationship with Pete Seeger and like is not aware, like, was he that like kind of humble and folksy and kind of nicey guy that like that in real life?
He was beloved in the folk community. I'll admit I'm not super into Pete Seeger. Like I haven't done much research on him outside of like what I know already that he lived a ridiculously long life.
Yeah, he only died 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it was. I think it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, they said
so,
in the closing credits he died in 2014.
Exactly, and so I think with him, Ed Norton's great, and dude, especially when he was like singing like "The Lion Sleeps Tonight," I was like, holy shit,
Yeah.
that's Ed Norton singing. Like I got to give him a lot of props. I'll put it to you this way: he could get nominated. I kind of feel similarly his performance as I do as Denzel in Gladiator 2. I think he's a bit above Denzel in that regard. I think I enjoyed his portrayal of Pete Seeger more, but I'm like, he's great. I just don't know if I would personally nominate him for the Oscar, but he might just come along because the movie's really well respected and admired.
I mean, personally, I don't even think Denzel was that good in Gladiator 2. Again, it's one of those things where, again,
It was Denzel.
Well, again, it's by nature of him being Denzel, the rest of that movie being absolute shit. He's just like, of course he's going to seem like better, you know? But yeah, my final thoughts, I thought, again, really, really solid. Probably the best music biopic that we've had since, for me, Straight Outta Compton and Love and Mercy, which both came out the same year, which, again, not saying much considering how far that bar has been lowered. But, yeah, really, really impressed. Again, mostly Chalamet is the takeaway from here. If he wins, I will not be disappointed. I gave this, I was between a 4 and a 4.5, but yeah, 4 is, I think, more fair as far as the rating. Now let's move on to the real movie event. So you just got done watching this movie?
I just got done watching this movie.
Oh, man. It's funny because this seems to be kind of the going trend because I know another friend of mine is currently out in California. Also just recently got done watching this movie. And I saw this movie on Christmas Day night. Saw this at the Alamo in Wall Street, too, not the one in Brooklyn.
Oh.
Yeah, this was
yeah.
It's very rare that we get these types of movies where I'm like, yeah, this is a top 10 of the year, and I can figure this out, and I get that sense after the opening scene. The opening scene happens, and as soon as I saw Lily Rose Depp doing her first like shake that like what I call pop and lock in the garden, I'm like, yeah, top 10 of the year, easily.
Dude,
and then the rest of the movie he made, I'm like, oh yeah, top 5 of the year, like. Fuck, like, okay, like we should probably get into like the history of Nosferatu first before we actually like get into the movie itself and kind of why this movie's a lot more important than people realize. Because the whole thing, right, is this is not just another remake, right? The whole story of Nosferatu is that it is an illegitimate bastard child of Dracula, where the filmmaker, the producers of this movie, get this movie made without first securing the rights to the original novel. Oh, I'm so excited I even made the overlay disappear there. Is Nosferatu in the room with us right now? So they get the original rights to this. So they make the movie without securing the original rights. They get sued by Bram Stoker. They lose in court. All copies of the original film are burned. And then somebody years later secretly like saved a copy or found a copy or something, and that's how the movie was originally able to be made. Were you aware of any of this?
I didn't know that, and
yeah.
I've seen that movie. Wow,
yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, I like. So here's the thing: like, I only found this out because I was at the Alamo, and they were like going through like the history of the movie.
Right.
So that's kind of how I was able to find that out, and I was like, oh shit, like. Wow. I don't know, like I've always been a fan of Dracula. I've read the original novel when I was like 10 or 11. And I knew obviously about the Todd Browning movie. I always thought that movie was kind of just okay. I'm like,
yeah, I don't like it very much.
It's a lot less cool than I would have originally thought it was. But knowing that is the origin for Nosferatu, which again, aside from changing the names, is almost exactly the same story, so I can understand why they were sued. But knowing that is how it got made, I'm like, oh, this is like almost makes this like even cooler. Especially it came out like a full decade before Dracula, you know. Nosferatu was 1922, and then Dracula wasn't until 1933 or something like that.
I think it was 32 as well.
Yeah, 32. So a decade later, it comes out. So that kind of is important context as far as understanding the history and legacy. And obviously, we've seen the vast influences throughout the course of cinema, right? Famously, Werner Herzog remakes it in the 70s. You know, obviously, the influences go all the way to SpongeBob, which a lot of people give credit to. What We Do in the Shadows pays influence as well. One of the vampires is modeled after Nosferatu. There was another thing recently that I saw that pays homage. There's been so many things that have paid homage that have remade it kind of throughout the history. But this kind of, if you want to make the argument, is the first instance of vampires on film, you know, which is a genre that has gone through so many different twists and turns. One of the things that I've been talking about throughout the course of the 2020s is how, after I would make the argument that Twilight ruined vampires, you know, for kind of an entire decade, we finally are starting to get back to this idea of vampires being not only cool, but scary, which is what they were originally meant to be. You know, you always had like these little off products. You know, True Blood was obviously massively successful, but that was still kind of based on the Twilight, you know, the whole, the vampires being these, you know, sources of romance and mystery and intrigue, which if you ask me is what ruined, what ruined girls' dating standards for so many years, because how could regular average men possibly compare to the likes of Robert Pattinson and then, Stephen Moyer and Alexander Skarsgård and True Blood, whatnot. So, yeah, well, but you had efforts like 30 Days of Night and the Fright Night remake that were able to sneak their way in there. But recently, you've been seeing this kind of string of vampire movies that have been popping up again, both on film and TV. There was a Netflix movie that came out a few years ago called Night Teeth, which was way better than I thought it was going to be. Then the following year, there was this fun movie with Jamie Foxx and Dave Franco called Day Shift. Again, very fun, very nonsensical. He's basically like a bounty hunter who hunts down vampires, and Snoop Dogg is just randomly in there wielding a machine gun. It's a fun movie. It's not taking itself seriously at all. But the point being is that vampires have slowly been making their way back into the mainstream. Then you factor in Robert Eggers, who, again, part of the new generation of film brats, you know, these filmmakers that really came out in the 2010s. I would say one of a few that got their start through A24. I think the only one of those batch of filmmakers that I listed off that really didn't get their start with A24, well, Coogler was one of them, and then Damien Chazelle also did not get his start through A24. Because Whiplash was distributed by Sony Pictures Classics.
Yeah, he's never had an A24.
No, he hasn't. One of the few. But Eggers is one of the few. Again, got to start through A24 with The Witch, and then obviously made it huge with The Lighthouse.
Yes.
Kind of, I would say, took a couple steps back with The Northman, but I don't blame him for that. It's his only movie.
Still very good movie.
Very good movie, but he didn't get final cut for it, and so that's kind of the only one of his that really doesn't hit quite the same way for me for this one.
I agree.
But then I heard, I'm like, oh, Eggers is doing Nosferatu? I'm like, there's no way that he can possibly fuck this up. Even in the year 2024, where almost everything gets ruined. I'm like, there's no way he's gonna fuck this up. And I mean, take it from here, man. You literally just saw the movie.
Yeah, man. Look, I'll kind of give my history in standing on Nosferatu and the Dracula movies or whatever. I haven't really been huge on many of them. I have to rewatch the original again, but I was very tired when I saw that. I thought the Max Schreck performance is terrifying just when he walks into the camera. Yeah. It's like some of the most terrifying shit I've ever seen. But like I'm as I said, I'm not a fan of Todd Browning's Dracula outside of Bela Lugosi, who's great. I just saw the Werner Herzog one a few days ago. I thought it was good, but I thought it was like it really kind of like time, and it kind of felt very plotted out. And after watching this one, I'll loop back around to that one because there's an interesting point I want to make. And the only like Dracula vampire adjacent movie I've really loved in that sense is Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola in the 90s. And even that has a terrible Keanu Reeves performance. Yeah. So it's not like it's like the greatest movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, that one it's more so you enjoy it for the camp factor of it.
But the filmmaking is like
unbelievable, but there is a camp factor to it that you appreciate.
Sure. It's like bloody wolves chasing me through some blue inferno. I mean, it is just absolutely crazy.
I put the bastard there myself.
I've seen where the bastard sleeps.
Oh, it's so bad.
It's ridiculous.
It's so bad. It's incredible.
But then you got Hopkins cooking. I'll come back to him later.
Gary Oldman as the creature himself. I mean, that makeup.
His best performance, I think.
It's not his best. True Romance is his best, but that should have been Oscar nominated. Still, the fact that he makes that much of an impact with that little screen time.
I think like Bram Stoker is where he really got to shine the most. But besides the point, I really did love like how, sexual that movie was. Like anything that is like super, super aggressively sexual, I am into. Let me be honest with you right here. And so I was hoping that this was going to be the same way, very much in that vein.
Oh
And I
no.
figured,
Oh no.
knowing Robert Eggers, especially after seeing The Lighthouse, which I think is like one of the greatest horror movies of all time, like full stop. That should have been in my top 2 of 2019. I'm kicking myself that I didn't put in my top 10 list. But besides the point, I think that and The Witch and even The Northman to some extent have kind of proven that he has like a very similar sensibility in that regard. So I knew he was going to go hard with Nosferatu. This has been one of my most anticipated movies of this year for well over a year, maybe even like almost 2 years at this point when I heard that he was doing this, because I was like, there's no better man to adapt this story than Robert Eggers. And let me tell you something. I think this is easily the greatest vampire movie of all time. I really am just still buzzing from this movie when I got out of the theater. This is just one of the most perfectly crafted, executed, blocked horror films I've ever seen. The cinematography is just absolutely stunning. And I think it reminds me, of Conclave in that regard from this year, because I think that's another one of those movies where you felt every single camera movement was just so precise in regards to show, where these characters are in the frame, where they are in relation to each other, and just to move the story forward. Because back to Herzog for a sec, I feel like that version was just, it looked very, nice. It was captured beautifully, but it was kind of stagnant in the way that the story progressed. There wasn't as much vitality or even danger than there is in this movie, because especially when you get to the stuff in that one about like the plague, it's all done in a very low-key manner where it's not really arresting your attention, this one. And where this one, it's just like people are screaming. You see the agony, you see the pain on all these people, and the harm that this vampire Count Orlok is like causing on this village of people. It really feels like it is just so expertly directed from that regard. The way they build tension, the way that they, everything just kind of builds to such, emotional heights, and from scene to scene. You could argue that some of this movie feels a little bit long, but I also look back and I think to myself, I'm like, what scenes would I really cut out? Because I feel like every scene is leading to something, and they all explode in the most surprising and grotesque of ways that I was absolutely floored by this film. This film is phenomenal, and I agree with you. I think this is one of the absolute best movies of the year. I think this is one of the best horror movies of the entire decade.
Easily.
So far.
And again, that's not saying much considering the fact that this decade is all about killed cinema. But
Substance too, same year. Is
there you go.
Absolutely
exactly. But okay, so a couple things that I want to touch on there. One, how this kind of was the perfect movie for Eggers to direct after The Northman, and why it ties so well into his sensibilities. Besides the fact that once again it is a period piece, which again he has proven that he is the absolute master at, because nobody so far that I've seen in my lifetime has been better at capturing a certain time period that feels distant enough to where we can't really touch it or relate to it. The puritanical lifestyle of the early natives emigrating to the United States, shantytown England, for lack of a better statement, Viking era, and now obviously kind of this very kind of secluded period of like that weird 1600s, middle of Europe, kind of that Bavarian lifestyle. I believe this is also set around the time of the Black Plague, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So that kind of also ties in with as well, and kind of him using the vampire as the metaphor. That's the thing. Vampires to me in stories work best when they are metaphors for real world woes and ills. The whole intent of the original novel that Bram Stoker wrote was the fact that he was supposed to be emblematic of, the rich and the bourgeoisie slowly sucking and draining the life out of the working class. Kind of very, very, very relatable to the real world right now. But also, I think the difference between Dracula and Nosferatu is that Nosferatu was meant to be an emblem of all of the world's woes, not just kind of the rich and powerful. The fact that the way that when he literally feeds on his victims, it's not like this very sexy, very swooping in presence. It's like literally like a parasite almost. Like when you see him in his coffin, he's literally like this rotting corpse crawling with maggots. The fact that he is literally the devil incarnate, but how they're also tying this into this idea of, okay, he has sold his soul to the devil for eternal life, but that comes with a lot of caveats as well, where literally he's still decomposing, and he is literally still he is still dying, just not in the sense that now the curse is that he spreads his disease to everybody else. It presents vampirism as a disease, really, is what it is. And also the fact that he doesn't turn anybody into a vampire in this one. You don't really see that happen. Instead, what you have is he makes idle threats, and they very, very casually build and set up a certain set of deaths that happen later on in the movie. That when they happen, I was like, this is why Eggers is the fucking GOAT.
Dude, it's incredible, because what I absolutely loved about this movie is like, we are fucking going for it and we do not care at all.
No.
And I was like, thank you for letting me
because every single other slasher horror movie always pussies out at the last minute when it comes to those types of sequences. And you know what scene I'm talking about. I won't spoil it for people but for people who have seen the movie know what scene I'm talking about. And when it happens, the fact that they don't even show it, you just hear it, but you know it's happening. I'm like, yes.
And then the scene that comes later.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Masterful stuff. Masterful stuff. Like I said, the fact that this is a remake, but a remake of an kind of an illegitimate film. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. And like you were saying, the camera angle, the cinematography, Skarsgård. I think it's funny too, because people were asking, they're like, why do you think Skarsgård is better in this than he is as Pennywise? I'm like, it's simple, because there's no CG with this performance. That's why.
It's all like practical. I literally said, I was like, how is that Bill Skarsgård?
Yeah.
You cannot tell at all.
No, I thought it was somebody else. The way, even having to convince myself, I'm like, that's Bill Skarsgård. Even when you finally get to see him, because the movie does this thing where, again, when they first introduce the character, first of all, the way that they are able to like make you aware of his presence before you even actually see him, and it's like almost 40 minutes into the movie before you'll finally see him on frame, because you spend a lot of time with Lily Rose Depp and Nicholas Hoult building up to him before you actually get to him, and then once you get to him. Again, they keep him very much at a distance, cloaked in the shadows, out of frame, out of focus, and then they slowly start to narrow in, and then when you finally see him, but even when you finally see him, you're like, that's Bill Skarsgård? What?
It's absolutely insane, and that's the thing, like, I honestly think, well, maybe this is not going to happen, but I think he's, like, worthy of a nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and I would even go further to say Willem Dafoe is even more worthy. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Like, though, every time Willem Dafoe is in a movie, it doesn't matter what it is, he is always cooking, especially with Robert Eggers.
But with Eggers specifically, because Willem Dafoe's been in a lot of stuff recently, and it's kind of been one of those things. We know he always delivers, but we're kind of getting a little bit too much Dafoe, I would say. And he's kind of like, I would say, gotten to that point where it's like, okay, he's becoming comfortable in his Defoe-ness, where it's like, okay, he knows that we love him now for a certain thing, because we know every time we see him in a movie, it's going to be weird, But there's something of how Eggers is able to tap into that, where he's still kind of able to, like, the thing that Eggers does, and that I feel like no other filmmaker has done with him recently, is that Eggers is still able to make him feel human. Not just like, he's just, another Defoe over-the-top caricature. Eggers is capturing of him, they still make him feel like a human being. Like, even as nutso and over the top and eccentric as he is, he still does feel like a human being in this,
100%. And I think I would even argue, because I think we both agree, the fact that he was not nominated for The Lighthouse and let alone won the Oscar that year, absolute bullshit. That's like
the two biggest snubs. The two biggest snubs that year are him for supporting for The Lighthouse and Adam Sandler for lead for Uncut Gems of that year.
Fair. That's absolutely fair. And I think this is yet again, I actually liked him more in this than I did in Poor Things. I think this is like the best performance I've seen from him in the past couple of years, which is saying a lot, because he's been in a lot of movies that I personally love too. But yet again, he just like chews on every morsel of dialogue. And there's always something about this character, right? Because as I said, I'm going to bring it back to Bram Stoker's Dracula for a sec. Anthony Hopkins in the role of Van Helsing, he's the best part of that entire movie outside of Gary Oldman. And I honestly think he's like Oscar worthy in that movie too. So they always find like some of the greatest actors of all time to fill that role. And I feel like I guess it is a role that facilitates someone who's that great of a thespian, I suppose, because you think of those two, and that's like the first word I think should come to mind with those gentlemen there. And also, like, we got to talk about Lily Rose Depp, because she probably gets the best performance in the whole movie. Yeah. Holy shit.
It's so
I think
funny.
She should be nominated for Best Actress.
It's so funny, because up until this point, we were all like, Mikey Madison, she's the one to beat, obviously, and she's definitely going to win.
That way. Yeah.
But after this, I'm like, fuck, nah, it's Lily Rose Depp, man. Lily Rose Depp is the one. Yeah.
Can't go that far, but...
Nah, she's my number one of the year. She is. And I'll tell you why. Because Mikey Madison, at the end of the day, as good as she is in Honora, and she is fucking phenomenal, it's not a performance that I didn't think she was incapable of giving. Because I'd seen her, like, give not that exact type of performance before. Obviously, nothing in that part, but like I knew that that was something she was capable of. I have never seen a type of performance that Lily Rose Depp gives here in anyone, let alone like an actress of her age or generation. Like, there's a sequence in this movie where she simultaneously has to roll her eyes back into her head,
Oh
drool,
my
and
goodness.
contort her body as she's having like a breakdown because she's like because she's the central character of this movie too. She's the one that awakens him in the beginning. She's the one who's being kind of tortured and played by him, and she's constantly having this back and forth of being like seduced by him versus like being tortured by him, and how she and nailing all of those mannerisms alone. But just the physicality that she brings to this in combination with all of that, to me, I'm like, I have never seen anybody. And the fact that, again, none of it is CG. All of it is practical. And I'm just like, how? You know? Like, that's the sort of shit that I'm like, and especially after having just come off of 2 years of studying acting and understanding kind of like how it works and like kind of the level of discipline that you have to have when it comes to like being able to give that type of performance, that's the sort of shit where I'm like, yeah, like just bravo, hats off.
No, you can fully convince me, man. I think you make incredible points in that regard. And honestly, I'll say this. I mean, if I was voting for the Oscars, I'd vote her in my top 5 for Best Actress. That's a fact. Yeah. I mean, it's like, as you said, just the technicality of that performance is just unbelievably riveting. And every choice she makes is just so incredibly complex and difficult. And oh my goodness, it's just astounding work. Astounding work.
Yeah. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Like I said, the rest of this movie has an incredible supporting cast. Nicholas Hoult, who is having one of the best years of his entire career between this, Juror number 2, which was not expecting that to be as good as it was, and also fuck Warner Brothers forever for burying that movie, which, again, that was Clint's final, more than likely, it's gonna be his final movie. Like, I'm sorry, he's what, 94, 95? Like, yeah, this it's gonna be his final movie. I'm sorry. And the fact that they completely...
He's won.
Well, we'll see, but... Like the fact that they buried this, and it was actually really good. I actually okay, I would understand if the movie was like not so good because Clint hasn't exactly been making the best of his career the last couple of years, but it was actually really, really good. Like in a way that I wasn't expecting, and also giving one of the most terrifying supporting performance of the year in The Order, which is also a movie that I would heavily, heavily recommend.
See that.
Really, really good movie. But yeah, so Nicholas Hoult has been having the year possibly of his entire career. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Willem Dafoe, Emma Corrin, all the supporting performances are great. Ralph Ineson as well as kind of the doctor part. Like, again, all these like fill-ins for, again, all these characters that are like drawn directly from Dracula, but they don't have the same names because it's Nosferatu, but it's like it's all the same characters as in Dracula. Dude, you know?
Who was the actor who played the Renfield kind of character?
That guy.
That?
Yeah. I gotta look that up because he's the only one I don't know off the top of my head. But you're right. The only thing that I think is different and I don't necessarily remember is I believe that in the original Dracula novel, it's Renfield is the one that goes to see him and is the one that ends up eventually becoming driven insane. Or maybe I'm mistaking that. It depends on the adaptation that I see.
I think that's true. Renfield is the one initially.
Yeah. So the actor.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's Simon McBurney. That's who it is.
I don't know who that is.
Simon McBurney, he's been in a lot. He's one of those guys where, again, you wouldn't necessarily recognize the face, but he's been in a ton of things. He was in The Golden Compass. He was in Robin Hood. He was in Deathly Hallows Part 1, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, Mission Impossible, Rogue Nation. He's been in a lot of things.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's impressive then. Yeah, I thought he was really, really phenomenal. And some of his scenes, I was like, holy shit. Like, that was me this whole movie.
All the stuff with, like, the occult ritualistic and everything. Like you said, like, it's so funny because I'm like, for me, like, the movie to beat before this when it came to a cinematography standpoint was The Lighthouse. Obviously, everything that Soyunbu Makdeeprum does with Luca Guadagnino's, you know, more existential out there movies I love. You know, his work with Suspiria and most recently with Queer I love. But shit, this might be the new movie to beat cinematography-wise because, goddamn, I mean, just the covering of the vistas, the wide shots, the way it's everything that I try to emulate whenever I make my short films as well. I would say that I'm very heavily inspired by Eggers and Yaron Blasch's work. But the other thing, too, also, that I gotta say, and I think this is the thing that I don't know how many other people, this movie legitimately terrified me. I can't remember the last time that I was like, and I'm not talking like waiting for the jump scare to come, because also the fact that this is the first movie to actually effectively utilize jump scares, possibly ever, is insane. But, like, again, the fact that I'm actually, like, genuinely scared watching this. Like, and when, like, he discovers him in his tomb and he, like, comes out, like, that, I'm like, I legitimately, like, jumped out of my seat. I was like, no, I'm, like, actually scared of this. Like, I can't remember the last time a movie actually did this to me, like, ever, you know?
Well, I know for a fact, like, I don't get too scared by horror films, but there were a couple moments in this movie where I was absolutely shocked. I was like, whoa, I'm like, they did that?
Yeah.
And it really stands out. Like, I think the beginning especially was like that scene was terrifying. That
Yeah.
was insane.
Yeah.
One of the best openings of any movie this year, I would argue,
Yeah.
which is funny because
Absolutely.
the substance is kind of like in a similar field in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, but the substance, what I'll say about that is the substance it takes its time to kind of build up, and it's kind of not until the first switch comes. But this movie locks you in like from the get-go.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I love about it too is because like I know having seen all these adaptations, especially seeing the the Herzog one very recently, which this is much closer to, I think, than any of them. Like the story is so fully realized in a way that a lot of the other ones aren't. I feel like the moving pieces directly correlate from scene to scene to one another, and it doesn't feel, as I said, it feels a little bit long, but it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of fat on
Right.
this narrative at all.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Yeah, like I said, this is one of my favorites of the year. I'll just give a spoiler for my top 10 when we do that in January. This is in my top 10 of the year easily. Oh, man, I'm really debating because I gave this a 4.5 in my initial review, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, fuck, this might be a 5. This really might be a 5, which is kind of insane. I know we were talking about this. This has kind of been like the source of this constant back and forth source of argument between us throughout the entire year since this started, which is where you think this is a good year. I think this is an absolutely awful year. Not only an awful year, but one of the worst years for movies ever. But I will say, I do have to admit, well, the one thing I will not concede on my stance, but what I will give you is this is the year that I have given out the most amount of 5s. Now, is it just because the bar is so low for movies now that whenever a movie comes out like this, whereas I feel like we used to kind of be like inundated with movies like these coming out throughout like the latter half of the 2010s, so I wasn't as willing to give it out versus now, like, we get these movies, like, maybe once every couple of months, if that. So now, like, every time it comes out, I'm trying to think, like, the amount of 5s that I've given just looking over my letterbox. Like, let me just look over it. Dune 2, Wild Robot, Real Pain, The Substance, Anora, Brutalist and Apprentice, I only gave 4.5. Same with Queer and all of them. Hundreds of Beavers, I gave 5. Furiosa, at the time, I give a 5. That is no longer a 5. But, yeah, this is the most amount of 5 stars that I've given out to movies in years.
See, that's why, and I'll say it while I'm on here, just so everyone knows. I feel like that, to me, it's like, what we're going to remember are those movies that are just, like, absolutely peak. And I have not given, like, more than, like, 10 5 stars in a single year since, like, 2016. Like, it's usually, like, last year was 9, which was insane to me.
Yeah.
That was such a great year. And like back in 2020, it was like 1, and it was like a recorded, Broadway adaptation. Right. So it's like that to me. It's like I think that everyone's been fucking cooking this year. And honestly, man, look, this perfect movie. Might have a couple criticisms, like I said, with the pace, and also I think there's like certain lines, like or at least one at the beginning. It's like such a small nitpick that's kind of like just talking to the audience, and I was like, I guess that was unnecessary, but like it's whatever. It doesn't drag it down at all. So that being said, I'm going to give this a 4.75 out of 5, which technically would round up to 5 stars on Letterboxd. I mean, this is just. Absolutely stunned by this film, and I'm honestly going to see it again later this week because like I need to know where this lands in my top 10 list to be quite honest with you, because I have a very good feeling that this definitely could make the cut.
Yeah. So I'll say this as far as kind of how it appealed to my ranking. I will say again, my familiarity with the story and the fact that it is still Dracula, no matter how many changes they do make, for me, it's the ending that it comes down to. That's the make or break. Because obviously, again, Dracula, we all know it ends. There's a couple casualties, but they all succeed. John, gets Mina back. They kill Dracula. They kill the monster. Everybody kind of gets their happy ending. Not here. Not here. Like we said, Jonathan or Nicholas Holt's character's name in this, who I'm not remembering, does not. Again, he is not the main character. He does not get his happy ending here. And the Mina character, the Lily Rose Depp character, yeah, she has to do a little self-sacrifice here in order to finally kill the monster. And also the way that they are able to like kind of show the vampire like when it finally dies in the daylight. I'm like, I've never seen a vampire get killed like that.
Makeup, man. I mean, I know The Substance is going to win at the Oscars, but this is definitely getting nominated. Yeah, I would be shocked if this is not.
I had this as my number 1 for every single one of my technical awards: cinematography, editing, costumes,
don't know if I can go
sound
that
design. No, it is for me. It is.
definitely going to pop up in all those categories for me, no doubt. But
So yeah. So my
yeah,
answer
I mean,
right now is it's tentatively 4.5. It might be a 5 afterwards. Still not sure, but
I can't wait to see it again, man, because I just feel like when I go back and see it, it's just going to get
yeah,
stronger
yeah.
and
This is
stronger.
one
Not as good as The Lighthouse, but
I definitely want to see like how many girls I can trick into coming to see with this with. I'd be like, yeah, it's a vampire movie, you'll enjoy it, you know, and then like having them see like the scariest horror movie ever made.
and of course, as I said, very horny.
Very, very horny. Hey, listen, Edgar, we know that when it comes to Edgar, he's horny as hell, and he is unintentionally hilarious as hell. Like, there were a lot of moments that, again, may have slipped past people, but, like, that were actually, like, really, really funny. Like, and, I mean, just going back to Skarsgård, the voice that he does here, I'm like, how? How is that Bill Skarsgård? I don't get it. I don't understand it.
Man, I think that's what it is.
It truly makes sense. It really, really does. Again, I'm like, I'm like crazy. I'm like, this dude looks like a fucking like worm eel in real life, and yet he still has played two of the most iconic movie monsters of all time. Like, how is this man related to Alexander Skarsgård, who is a literal Norwegian god reincarnated? Like, I don't understand it at all.
Their father, which is even crazier. Baron von Harkonnen is very similar.
Yeah, exactly. Baron von Harkonnen and so many different things. Something about that family. You're right. Couldn't agree more. But Nathaniel, again, couldn't have asked for anybody else to wrap up the year with. It has been an absolute blast and a pleasure. I wish we could do this more often. You'll be on in January, obviously, for our Oscars breakdown predictions episode. That's going to be a fun episode. We may have some special guests on that one as well in order to break down some of our predictions as well. But, yeah, that one's going to be a fun one. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Well, of course, I want to thank you for having me on. It was an absolute pleasure, and I'm glad we got to do this one more time in 2024. But if you want to look for me, of course, I got a YouTube channel under Nathaniel Ahart. All my socials are linked there, so you can find that if you check that out. And got a lot of out-of-theater reaction reviews, music reviews and stuff. And, you know, there's going to be a lot coming down the pipeline, doing some video essays, specifically one for the top 10 films of 2014. I want to get it done by the end of the year, but I'm a little behind.
Yeah, I was about to say, you got 2 days, so.
Well, rest assured, it's going to be up within the first couple of weeks for, you know, your viewing pleasure. And we would really appreciate the follow. And yeah, thanks again for having me on, man. It's an absolute pleasure. And I'm really glad that we got to spend as much time together this year as we did.
Absolutely, yeah. We spent a lot of good quality time together. We saw a lot of fun, interesting movies together. I saw the TV Glow. We also saw, what was the other one that we saw together that I'm currently
A Real Pain.
A Real Pain. Yeah, I'm glad. A very, very interesting theater experience that happened there, but memorable to say the least. Oh my God, it's still hilarious whenever we think about it. You guys know where to follow me. I don't need to plug my socials anymore. You guys know exactly where to follow me with everything going on. If you've been following me up until this point, we'll see you guys in the new year, 2025. This is officially it for podcasting for 2024. All I can say for this year is goodbye and good riddance. We'll see you guys in the new year.